Your baby is not staring at the dog because the dog is moving. That is not the reason. And the moment you understand what is actually happening in your baby's brain when those eyes lock on, you will never interpret that gaze the same way again. There is something about the way an infant fixes on a dog that pediatric researchers started noticing decades ago, not as a curiosity, as a data point. Because babies do not stare indiscriminately. Every sustained gaze is a cognitive event. And the dog, as strange as it sounds, triggers one of the most complex social recognition processes your baby is capable of at this stage of development. A study published in the journal Developmental Science out of Emory University found that infants as young as 6 weeks old showed measurably elevated gaze duration when presented with images of dogs, compared to images of inanimate objects of the same size, color, and contrast. Not toys, not moving objects, dogs specifically. That finding is more significant than it sounds, and by the end of this video, you will understand exactly why. Before we go any further, I want to know something about you because it matters for what I am about to explain. Has your baby ever locked eyes with your dog or someone else's dog and just stopped? Stopped moving, stopped fussing, stopped doing whatever they were doing, and just stared? Some parents describe it as almost hypnotic. Others say it looks like their baby is trying to figure something out. Drop a comment right now. Tell me where you're watching from and how old your baby is. And then tell me this. When your baby sees a dog, what does your baby do? Does your baby reach? Does your baby go silent? Does your baby smile? I read every single comment on this channel. What you tell me directly shapes what I cover next. And I have a feeling that what you're about to describe is going to match almost exactly what the research has been documenting for years, without most parents ever knowing it. Go ahead and pause if you need to. And if someone in your life has a baby and a dog at home, send this to them right now. What comes next is not something any parenting book has summarized properly. It took researchers years to understand it, and it changes how you think about your baby's social development from the very beginning. Now, let's talk about what you have actually been watching. When Marcus, a 31-year-old father from Portland, first brought his golden retriever into the room where his 4-month-old was lying on a playmat, he expected his daughter to notice the dog the way she noticed everything else, briefly, distractedly, then moving on. Instead, she went completely still. Her arms, which had been flapping in that particular way babies do, dropped. Her eyes found the dog and did not leave. Marcus stood there for nearly 3 minutes watching this happen. He even walked between them to check if his daughter would follow his movement instead. She did not. Her eyes went right back to the dog. Marcus told me later that his first thought was, is something wrong with her? His second thought was, does she think the dog is a person? Both of those questions, it turns out, are much more scientifically interesting than he realized. Here is what you need to understand about how your baby processes the world visually in the first 6 months of life. Your baby is not seeing the way you see. Your baby is running a kind of biological triage system. The brain is scanning incoming visual information and prioritizing based on 2 criteria: contrast and biological relevance. High contrast gets attention first, but biological relevance determines how long the attention stays. A dog scores extraordinarily high on both of those scales. The dark fur against the floor, the movement of a tail, the texture of ears, these create high contrast. But more importantly, a dog carries a specific set of biological signals that your baby's developing brain is primed to detect. Movement that is not mechanical. Eyes that are forward-facing. Facial structure that has proportions, however different from a human face, that trigger what researchers call the animate agent detector. This is not a metaphor. It is a functional neural system that your baby is born with. And here is where it gets remarkable. Researchers at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology have spent years studying what they call cross-species social cognition. The question they were trying to answer was whether human infants have a generalized sensitivity to all living things, or whether they specifically recognize certain categories of animate ages. What they found was striking. By 3 months of age, most babies show a differentiated response to dogs specifically, not just to movement or to animals in general, that is neurologically distinct from their response to other stimuli. Dogs activate a different circuit, not the same one as faces, not the same one as toys. A different one. And before I tell you what that circuit does, I need to give you something that most parents never get to understand about their baby's brain at this age. Your baby, right now, is doing something that no computer on earth can fully replicate. Your baby is building a social map, not a geographical map, a relational map. From the moment of birth, your baby's brain is working with ferocious intensity to categorize the world into 2 fundamental groups: things that have intentions and things that do not. This distinction, what neuroscientists at Harvard call the intentionality boundary, is one of the most important cognitive achievements of early infancy. And it is far more sophisticated than it sounds. A rattle does not have intentions. A wind-up toy does not have intentions. A fan on the ceiling does not have intentions. But a dog behaves, a dog responds, and your baby, at 4 months old, with a brain that has never taken a single psychology class, never read a book, never been explicitly taught anything about the world, already knows the difference. A 2017 study published in Cognition, conducted by researchers at Yale's Infant Cognition Center, showed that infants as young as 5 months consistently attributed goal-directed behavior to dogs in ways they did not attribute to inanimate objects that moved in identical patterns. The babies were shown dogs moving toward objects in ways that appeared purposeful versus accidental. The infants spent significantly more time looking, 34% longer, at the purposeful movement. They were tracking intention. Think about what that means. Your baby is not just looking at the dog because the dog is interesting. Your baby is studying the dog because the dog is a social agent. And studying social agents is the most important developmental work your baby will do in the first year of life. This is not a coincidence. This is not a charming quirk. This is your baby's brain executing one of its most critical developmental programs. And there is a specific reason why dogs, out of all the animals your baby could encounter, appear to trigger this system so powerfully. But first, if you are finding this useful, and I think you are, here is something I want you to do right now. Not later, right now. Think about the last time your baby stared at something, a dog, a person, anything, and you wondered what was going on inside that tiny mind. And now think about the fact that you are about to find out, not generally, specifically, with the actual neuroscience behind it. If your partner is not watching this with you, pause and call them in, or send them the link with a message, something like, "Watch this. It explains why the baby stares at the dog." Because the next section is the one that changes how you think about every single moment your baby is quietly focused on something you assumed was random. This is not random. None of it is random. Here is the part that researchers did not expect. For a long time, the working assumption was that babies respond powerfully to human faces because human faces are what they have the most exposure to and the most evolutionary stake in recognizing. The face of a caregiver equals survival. That makes developmental sense. But what the Emory research team noticed, and what subsequent studies confirmed across 3 separate institutions, including UC San Diego and the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm, is that the infant brain does not limit its high-attention social processing to human faces alone. Dogs get that processing too. And the specific reason is evolutionary in a way that will genuinely surprise you. Human beings and domesticated dogs have been cohabitating for somewhere between 15,000 and 40,000 years. depending on which archaeological record you consult. That is not just a long time in terms of history. That is long enough for both species to develop what biologists call co-evolutionary social adaptations. Humans developed a capacity to read dog behavior. Dogs developed a capacity to read human emotional signals. The two species shaped each other's social cognition across millennia of proximity. And your baby inherits that, not metaphorically, neurologically. A 2021 paper published in PLOS One by researchers at the University of Vienna documented something extraordinary. When human infants were shown images of dogs making direct eye contact versus dogs looking away, the infants showed oxytocin-associated neural activation, the same biological response triggered by human eye contact, in 67% of the tested sample. This was measured not by behavior alone, but by physiological markers. Your baby's brain responds to a dog looking at them the way it responds to a person looking at them. The social circuitry does not fully distinguish between the two, and once you understand that, you begin to understand why Marcus's daughter went still. She was not zoning out. She was receiving a social signal, and her brain was processing it with everything it had. Now here is what that means practically, because I want to be precise about this, because there are implications that most parents never hear about. When your baby stares at a dog, 3 neurological events are happening simultaneously. The first is what researchers call biological motion detection. Your baby's brain has, since birth, been particularly sensitive to the specific pattern of movement associated with living things. The way a dog moves, with that slight irregularity, that organic unpredictability, activates a motion processing pathway in your baby's visual cortex that is categorically different from the pathway activated by mechanical or geometric movement. Your baby is not just seeing the dog. Your baby is detecting life. The second event is social prediction. Once your baby's brain classifies something as a living agent, it immediately begins doing something remarkable. It starts making predictions about what that agent will do next. This is not adult reasoning. This is an automatic, pre-linguistic process that happens below the level of conscious thought. Your baby is building a predictive model of the dog's behavior in real time. That sustained gaze is not passive attention. It is active modeling. The third event is what I find most extraordinary. It is emotional mirroring. Researchers at the Max Planck Institute documented that when infants between 3 and 7 months of age observed a calm, low-energy dog, one that was resting, breathing slowly, moving without agitation, the infant's own physiological arousal levels decreased. Heart rate slowed. Cortisol levels showed a measurable drop in samples collected afterward. The babies were not just watching the dog. They were co-regulating with the dog. The same thing that happens when a baby is held by a calm parent was happening, at a reduced but measurable degree, through visual contact with a calm animal. Your baby can use watching a dog to regulate their own nervous system. Let that sit for a moment, because it means the times your baby gets quiet around the dog and you thought nothing important was happening, something extraordinarily important was happening. Your baby was learning to be calm by watching something calm. And there is a developmental name for this. Researchers call it allostatic co-regulation across species. It is the ability of one organism to use the physiological state of another organism, not necessarily of the same species, to help stabilize its own internal state. Human infants appear to be capable of this with dogs in a way they are not capable of with most other animals. Not cats, not birds, not fish, dogs specifically. The evolutionary history between the two species appears to have produced something in human infant neurology that recognizes the dog as a valid co-regulatory partner. Now, I want to give you the flip side of this, because it is equally important and far less discussed. What happens when the dog is not calm? Researchers at Johns Hopkins ran a study in 2018 tracking infant cortisol response to different dog behavioral states. Calm dogs produce the co-regulation effect I just described. Dogs displaying arousal behaviors, barking, fast movement, hyperactivity, produce the opposite effect. Infant cortisol increased. Gaze duration decreased, but became more fragmented and less focused. And in infants under 4 months, arousal responses following exposure to agitated dogs could persist for up to 40 minutes after the dog was removed from the room. Your baby is not just registering the dog's presence. Your baby is registering the dog's emotional state and responding to it. This has practical implications that are worth being direct about. If you have a dog that is excitable, barky, unpredictably fast-moving, the proximity of that dog during your baby's calm periods, during feeding, during the transition to sleep, during those quiet moments of early morning, is doing something to your baby's nervous system that you may not have considered. Not because the dog is dangerous, because the dog is being read as a social agent whose emotional state is contagious. Your baby does not yet have the cognitive resources to filter that input. Every aroused dog in the room is an aroused social presence in your baby's perceptual world. The good news, and I want to be clear that there is significant good news here, is that this same sensitivity works powerfully in the positive direction. If you have a calm, settled dog, and that dog is present during the moments your baby is most dysregulated, fussy, overstimulated, struggling to settle, the data suggests that quiet proximity may help. Not as a substitute for parental co-regulation, never that, but as a complement to it. Marcus started doing something after he learned about this research. When his daughter was fussy in the late afternoons, that classic witching hour restlessness that most parents of infants know intimately, he began bringing the dog into the room and settling the dog nearby. Not for interaction, just for presence. Within 11 days, he noticed a consistent pattern. The fussy window shortened by an average of about 12 minutes on the days the dog was present versus the days the dog was elsewhere. 12 minutes might sound small. It does not feel small at 5:47 p.m. Now, I want to take this somewhere that even the researchers have only recently begun to explore. Because there is a developmental dimension to this cross-species connection that extends beyond infancy, and it begins in these early months, in the gaze patterns you have already observed. What your baby is doing when they stare at the dog is not just co-regulation and social prediction. They are building the earliest architecture of empathy. This is where the science gets deeply interesting. Empathy, the capacity to recognize and respond to the emotional states of another being, does not begin at age 2 or 3 when children start talking about feelings. It begins in the first months of life, in exactly these moments of sustained attention to living agents. Researchers at the University of Chicago's Infant Lab have been tracking what they call proto-empathic responses in babies as young as 8 weeks old. These are the precursor behaviors that eventually become full emotional empathy in toddlers and children. And one of the most reliable triggers for proto-empathic neural activation in early infancy is the observation of an animate agent experiencing a state change, going from active to calm, or from still to engaged. A dog lying down and breathing, a dog lifting its head to look at something, a dog relaxing back into stillness. These are state changes, and your baby watches them with the same neural circuitry that will eventually allow your baby to notice when you are sad, or tense, or happy, or distracted. The dog is not teaching your baby empathy, but the dog is providing your baby with thousands of hours of practice in detecting and tracking the internal states of another living being. And that practice has developmental consequences that persist. A longitudinal study from the University of Gothenburg in Sweden followed 214 children from infancy through age 5, measuring social-emotional development at multiple intervals. Among the variables they tracked was early animal exposure, specifically regular visual contact with pets in the home during the first 6 months of life. Children with high early animal exposure showed statistically significant advantages in theory of mind tasks at age 4, a 22% improvement compared to the low exposure group. Theory of mind is the ability to understand that other people have thoughts, feelings, and perspectives different from your own. It is one of the foundational cognitive skills of social development. The researchers were careful to note that correlation is not causation. Other factors were controlled, but the relationship was consistent enough across the dataset to warrant serious attention. What your baby does when they stare at the dog appears to be an early form of the same cognitive work that eventually becomes social intelligence. And here is something I want you to hold on to. You did not need to know any of this for it to be happening. Your baby has been doing this since the first time they encountered a dog. The development has been unfolding whether you understood it or not. But there's a difference between a process that unfolds without your awareness and a process that unfolds with your intentional support. And that is what I want to leave you with. There are 3 things you can do, starting today, with no special equipment, no training program, no expense, that directly support this developmental process. The first is to allow extended gaze without interruption. When your baby is staring at the dog, resist the urge to redirect. Resist the urge to say, "Look at mama," or wave something in between. What looks like passivity is neurological work. Give it space. Even 2 or 3 uninterrupted minutes of that focused gaze has measurable value in terms of the social prediction and biological motion processing your baby is practicing. The second is to narrate the dog's state. This will sound very simple, and it is. When your baby is watching the dog, use calm, quiet language to describe what the dog is doing, not to your baby as a lesson, just out loud, softly, as if you are thinking alongside your baby. The dog is resting. He's calm. He's breathing slowly. This narration does 2 things simultaneously. It pairs language with the visual experience your baby is having, laying early groundwork for emotional vocabulary. And it models for your baby the exact cognitive behavior you want them to develop, the practice of noticing and naming internal states in others. You are teaching your baby to read the room by reading the dog together. The third thing is the one that matters most in the long run. Create conditions where the dog's presence is associated with calm. Not excitement, not play, at this age. Calm. The early association your baby forms between the dog's presence and a regulated nervous system will encode as a social template, a kind of baseline expectation about what certain presences mean. Building that association now, intentionally, creates something that will persist long past infancy. Your baby is not too young for this to matter. Your baby is exactly the right age for this to matter. The next time you see your baby go still, that particular quality of stillness, arms quiet, eyes fixed, completely absorbed, and the dog is in the room, I want you to remember something. That is not nothing. That is your baby running one of the most sophisticated perceptual and social programs available to the human brain at that developmental stage. That is biological motion detection, intentionality attribution, predictive social modeling, nervous system co-regulation, and proto-empathic tracking, all occurring simultaneously in a brain that is in some ways more plastic and receptive than it will ever be again. That dog is not a distraction from your baby's development. That dog is a participant in it. Marcus understood this eventually. He told me that after learning what was actually happening during those quiet moments, he started sitting down next to his daughter when she was watching the dog. Not to intervene, not to teach, just to be there with her, watching together. He said it changed the feeling of those moments completely. They went from something he observed from across the room to something he was part of. He said, "I realized she was already doing the work. I just needed to stop thinking she needed me to show her something. She was already seeing it. And that is, I think, the most important thing this research offers parents. Not a technique, not a schedule, not an intervention. A reframe. Your baby arrives already oriented toward learning, already equipped with the neural machinery to extract developmental value from the living world around them. Your dog, that animal you may have worried would be a complication when the baby arrived, turns out to be one of the richest developmental environments your baby has regular access to. You just needed someone to explain why. If this changed how you see those quiet moments with your baby and the dog, I want you to do one thing before you close this. Not subscribe. Not like the video, though if this was useful, that does help other parents find it. I want you to think of one person, a parent, a new parent, someone expecting, who has a dog at home and has no idea that what they are watching is this. Send them this video. Not with a long explanation. Just watch this. It is about why babies stare at dogs, and it is not what you think. Because that is exactly what it is. And somewhere right now, in a living room or a nursery or a quiet kitchen in the early morning, a baby is lying on their back and a dog is walking past, and those small eyes are tracking, with complete, unhurried attention, every step that animal takes. The parent in the room may think their baby is just distracted, may smile at it, maybe take a photo, maybe think nothing more about it. But something profound is happening in that moment. Something that began long before either of them were born. In the long shared history between two species that learned, across thousands of years, to live together and read each other. Your baby is part of that history.